Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Digital Hallway, live on Facebook. And if you're listening to us on the DH podcast, welcome to our show. Today we have a really great discussion, which I think is a discussion that we're not having enough of, and that's the student mental health. And today we are joined by Sam Fiorella, who is the founder of the Lukas Fiorella Friendship Bench. So a little bit about Sam. For the past 30 years, Sam has been building a customer lifetime value through innovation acquisition strategies, influence marketing, and affinity programs in the private sector. He's also a professor of marketing at Seneca College and a co-author of Q Publishing's Influence Marketing, How to Create, Manage, and Measure Brand Influencers. But today, we have him here for his real passion project, which is the student mental health. We have him here today for that discussion as the director and co-founder of the Lukas Fiorella Friendship Bench, a not-for-profit foundation that brings attention to the importance of student mental health through the Yellow is for Hello campaign. Sam, thanks very much for joining us on the Digital Hallway today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Sam and I have known each other for a number of years, fortunately through Social Media Camp, which is where I get to meet some truly fabulous people. And he is probably one of the most interesting people that I've got in my friends list. Passionate about the stuff that he works on and just absolutely engaging in everything. But I've had the opportunity to work with him on the Yellow is for Hello campaign and the Friendship Bench, especially when he was on Vancouver Island and at Vancouver Island University doing the installation. And I think the thing that really got me truly fascinated with what you're doing, Sam, is the engagement of the students. The student body just seems really passionate about this sort of thing. Have you seen that as you go across the country and across the continent with this content?
Yeah, and I have to say that this is really driven by the students. Danny Brown, Robert Clark, and I founded this campaign, and it was an experiment at first. Let's try it in a couple of schools. Let's see if it's of interest to anybody, if there's any traction. And from the first installation and the first campaign that we ran at Carleton University, we've been chasing this organization since because the students have picked it up and have been running with it. Every school I go to, it seems to be embraced more and more, and the students are stepping up with bigger and better ideas, bigger and better campaigns, which is fantastic.
And I saw that when we were in Nanaimo for the installation at the Vancouver Island University, was the engagement was not only just attending, but they were building cupcakes, they had balloons. I mean, they were really engaged with not only the foundation, but also with the student body and getting them involved in that whole presentation. It was just really, really impressive to see. So right off the bat, tell us a little bit of the story about how the Lukas Fiorella Friendship Foundation came to be.
Well, it like many of these stories, it started with a personal tragedy. My wife and I lost our son, Lukas, to depression, a silent battle with depression when he was just starting his second year of university. And this was almost 3 years ago. And in the aftermath of his death, we obviously were shocked and didn't really know what to make of it. So we were asking questions. We were asking lots of questions because we had no idea that my son was suffering. At least no more, teen angst than any other teenager, moving away from home and, dealing with university for the first time. And in sort of that questioning, we got to know a lot of his friends and peers that we hadn't spoken to before. And there was just an amazing number of stories that were coming out of that. And so we had two basically sets of information that were being presented to us. Number one, that Lukas was suffering silently and that he, on the outside, was a happy-go-lucky kid. Again, normal teenage angst, but typically he was the guy that all of his friends went to when they needed a laugh. He had friends, he had a job. He was not the stereotype of what one thinks is somebody who's suffering with depression or anxiety. On the other side, we were getting stories from his friends who were saying how ironic it was, and tragic at the same time it was, that Lukas passed from his battle with depression because he saved them from taking their life when they were at their low point and they had decided to take their life. Others came to us with stories of how Lukas had kept them in school when they had decided to drop out because they couldn't make any connections and that they were just too stressed out over the entire experience. And so we had a number of these stories, and Danny Brown, Robert Clark, and I were talking about it. We had, before we discovered that my son died, we had already decided we should do something. Danny and I in particular, we wrote a book together. We had started to get a little bit of, social media notoriety with what we were doing. And we said, we've got to do something more than just promote ourselves. We've got to do something more for the community because this is all just so fake. And so right afterwards, we met. Actually, the day of his funeral was the day we were supposed to meet to talk about what we were supposed to do. So it was almost fate. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, we got together and I was telling them these stories. And they says, well, you know what? Lukas just answered our question. What a shame that he's not here to do those acts of kindness and reaching out to people. So why don't we try and honor him by continuing that legacy and encouraging other students to follow in his footsteps? And so the one sort of theme amongst all of these stories that we heard about my son reaching out, and there were dozens of them, is everybody independently, everybody said to us, well, Lukas just came to me and said hello. And I broke down and started crying because somebody was paying attention to me, or I sat down and talked to him because he was the first person who seemed to genuinely care about what I was going through. He just said hello. And so that's what generated this campaign. In the weeks after my son's death, we said we need to do something to prevent other families like me from finding out too late that their kids are suffering, and having friends lose friends because they too didn't know and weren't educated. And so the Yellow is for Hello campaign and the Friendship Bench was started from that.
And really, it seems that it sometimes takes a tragedy to create something that's got value to the larger population. And I know that when I saw that news come out about Lukas passing, being a person who suffers from clinical depression myself, it really hit home. To see that turn into something like this is just, it's kind of awe-inspiring to see, because the intestinal fortitude to be able to get past the grief of being a parent who's lost a child and do something like this says a lot about you yourself. Wow. And I certainly thank you for a lot of the work that you do. So what do you believe is the biggest impact on student mental health today? I don't know that I could say that there's the one thing that's the biggest. The reality is I believe that it's a combination of forces that are happening. I think the stigma is certainly one of them. What we're discovering in the outreach that we are doing with students in schools, secondary and post-secondary schools across this country, is that they're woefully uneducated on the symptoms of mental health or mental illness. Parents and students, they just don't know. Like, I didn't know. My son's friends, after he died, his roommates in particular, who lived with him and saw him every day, day in, day out. In hindsight, they said, Mr. Fiorella, we should have known. Now that we think back, these were the things that were happening that we should have been able to pick up, but they didn't know because they were never educated. They were never encouraged to talk about how they were feeling when it comes to depression. And they weren't educated to look out for what other people might be going through. And so that stigma and that lack of education, I think, is right up there with one of the major factors. But then you have to really look at a combination of other things that are compiling. And again, this is all just feedback that I've received from students as I cross the country, launching these programs and, running lectures and talking to students. They feel disassociated from society. They don't believe that
the path that they're on is, well, they were told, but the path that they're on is going to be straight. You got to study hard, get into a good university, get a degree, and you're going to have a great paying job. You know, they see this straight line, but when they get there and they see that it's a zigzag, that there's so many obstacles in their way, from tuition that they can't seem to afford to pay. One of my son's friends, in fact, had to get into university, had a 97 average and got rejected from an engineering program with a 97% average. That's insane. That's essentially perfect, but it's yet not good enough to get into a university because the competition is so high right now for places. And if you do get that degree, then what? The cost of living, especially if you live in a place, you know, like southern BC or Ontario right now, it is just so expensive to buy a home. What kind of a job do you need right coming out of university to be able to move out on your own? A one-bedroom condo in Toronto right now is upwards of $1.4, $1.5 million. And, you know, so they see all of these disconnects between what they think their path is and what the reality is when they get there. And a combination of not knowing how to deal with that, a combination of that with that disassociation, and for a lot of these kids, it's just too much. So I don't think it's any one thing. I think there's a combination of things, from drugs and alcohol, going to university at too young an age, being alone, not being educated, money troubles, social pressures, competition for not only to get into school, but competition for jobs afterwards. You put all of these on, paired with the lack of education, and it's no wonder that suicide rates are on the increase.
No, I completely agree. I know that, I have a 15-year-old son. He's got a couple of years left in high school, and he's going to be going off to university after that. And we're sitting there saying, you know, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And he has a plan as to what he wants to do. But we're also starting to see that there's a lot of other people that have a similar plan. We're fortunate that he's got a fairly active family and friend base, but you know, it's a constant. What kind of pressure is he under this week? He has a lot on his plate, and I'm sure when you get into university, that plate gets piled up a lot higher and higher as things go, and the competition in high school is really starting to get to that point as well, isn't it?
I'm dealing with one school in particular that has one of our benches, and the administrators at that school were telling me that in grade 12, they have a hard time keeping kids in their math class because there are parents right now that are paying private schools to teach just the math course. They're paying $10,000 just to have their kids do a grade 11 or grade 12 math class because they're guaranteed to get an A if they focus with this private school. So it's an official credit that gets applied to their high school diploma. So at a certain time of the day, you've got this exodus of grade 12 kids that are going out to a private math course for $10,000 because it guarantees them an A and gives them a better chance of getting them into a university, again, because the competition is so high. It's insane, the pressure. And it goes even younger than that. My daughter I have a younger daughter. She just graduated grade 8 about a year ago, elementary school. And at her commencement ceremony for, you know, her elementary school graduation, somebody from the school board came and spoke to them and said, you know, you need to have a plan for your life. You know, as 13-year-olds, you need to start thinking about what you want to do for life. And starting next year, once you enjoy this summer, start thinking about where you're going to volunteer. Start thinking about the courses you're going to take. Maybe you need to take some extracurricular courses or programming, maybe the volunteer in that field. You need to start planning and thinking now what you're going to do and start building towards that. And I understand the intent behind that to say, you know, start thinking about it, because if you are going to volunteer, you might as well volunteer in something that you think you want to do, right? Start getting those extra credits, start getting that experience now. But the pressure, that I could see the look on these kids' faces, my daughter in particular, like, you know, and I know myself, I'm 50 years old and I've gone through 4 major career changes in my lifetime. Right? None of them were planned, right? I studied political science and I ended up in retail, running a retail chain. And then I went into importing, and then I moved into big box retail, and then I went into corporate sales, and then I moved into technology marketing, and now I run a marketing agency, and I'm a professor of marketing. You know what I mean? And I studied political science. So, and it's just because I rolled with the punches, right? That was just me and my personality. But I had flexibility because university cost me $2,000 a year when I went to the University of Toronto, right? It wasn't expensive. Now it's $20,000 a year for most kids who, live in dorms, and food plans and the cost of computers and everything. So it's just not as straightforward, and they're putting way too much pressure on kids to, get 90s, get into university right after you graduate high school, do your 3 or 4 years and then become a doctor. You know what I mean? There's no middle ground. There's no take a year off. There's no, after 2 years, if it doesn't work, it's okay. Your life is not defined by what you do. Your happiness is not going to be defined, by you getting your internship right after school or getting like an $80,000 a year job right out of your, last year of university. And that's what the expectation is being set by society and by parents, because they know that if you can't, and I did this to my son, so I know helicopter parenting is not a thing. It's lawnmower parenting, right? We just blow everything out of the way. You don't have to work, just study, everything else will work out. That isn't the right thing. Kids need to have realistic expectations, but they also need to know that we as parents and we as a society are going to accept them if they can't figure it out in 4 years. If they take 8 years, that's okay. We still love them anyway. They don't feel that. What I'm hearing from students is that our love as parents and our acceptance as a society is based on how well they do at school and how well they achieve these milestones that we set for them. That rigidity just is breaking a lot of them.
So really, a lot of the times it's a combination of society and the parents that are putting that pressure on these kids.
Yeah, knowingly, wittingly or unwittingly, that is definitely happening. I know I put an excessive amount of pressure on my son, and that wasn't necessarily the only factor that led to his depression. There are physical issues that go on there, chemistry, in the brain. There's all kinds of issues, but these external pressures, be they from us as parents or us as a society, exasperates that. And when they can't seek help or when they don't feel comfortable enough to ask for help, then they go inward. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse to the point that that pain is just too much. And that disassociation from what they thought their life was going to be, and this inability in their mind to get to that point of happiness or that point of meaning is just too much for them. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this escalation, not only in students saying that they're feeling depressed. The last study that I saw from a Canadian university was that 9% of all students have attempted to take their life.
Wow.
9% of all students. That's crazy. We know that 50% of people who suffer with depression don't ask for help, right? 50% don't ask for help. So, and I can go on and on with statistics, but the numbers are, in fact, getting worse and worse, it seems. And there isn't enough people calling out the issue and saying to students, hey, it's okay, you can talk to me about this. And that's the reason we created this campaign in the first place, is to follow my son's steps, because despite his suffering, with a simple hello, we have cases where he, in fact, stopped somebody from taking their life. And they're now this year graduating or have just graduated university because they were able to stick it through because somebody paid attention. And so we're discovering that the answer isn't necessarily more clinicians, although there's a shortage of them, in child and youth social workers and psychiatrists. There's right across this country, there's a shortage. There's definitely a shortage of education and money put towards the support of students right across the country. No one province is immune to this. But what seems to be helping is students talking to students. And that's why I think our campaign is really taking off, and why the program seems to be so effective, is that students are making it okay for other students to talk about mental health. And if they want crowdsource, we know this next generation, there's a lot of talk about millennials and crowdsourcing. They do everything as a group. Well, they need to know from their peers that it's okay to talk about it, that it's okay to be weak, or to seem weak, and it's okay to feel weak. Or feel weird and strange. Like, what kid? The two things that no kid wants. They don't want to be weird, right? They don't want to feel strange. They want to be part of the crowd. And so saying that I can't handle this, or I can't wake up, I'm always sleeping, or I get the shakes because I don't know how to handle certain situations, because their anxiety is so high. They think that people are going to say you're nuts. So with students talking to other students, they're making it okay. And I think that's why there's a bit of a difference right now in this campaign versus others that are out there.
So really, it's more towards breaking the stigma around mental illness and mental health than it is about getting the services. It's making sure that people understand that, it's completely normal to be this way in today's society.
Yeah, well, our campaign does three things in the way that we look at it. It's number one, it encourages students to say hello to each other and to think and talk about mental health, and in so doing, make it okay for others, not only you, to say hello, to know to say hello, and to be receptive to a hello if somebody says it to you, and to talk honestly and openly. But through the use of our benches, right? We put these benches, and the benches are there. It's a visual representation. These are not memorial benches to my son or to anybody else. This is just a visual representation of sitting down, taking a minute out of your day, and just chilling. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to just sit and talk. Get out of the grind of work and school and social pressures. But on the back of every one of our benches, we have a plaque that has our yellowisforhello.org a campaign website on it. And when students go to it, our site detects where they are and actually drills down on a map of Canada and shows them their bench at their campus on this map, and then shows all of the phone numbers and locations that they can go to for help. So that's the second thing that we do. We do actually try and connect students to available on-campus mental health resources. We're not a resource center. We just connect them.
Problem? Is that a problem that we're actually seeing at our universities, where they don't actually even know where to get the help from?
No question.
At their schools?
Yeah, and despite the effort that universities and colleges are putting into money in terms of advertising what they do and running campaigns, posters, social media, all that kind of stuff, we still have a number of students who, when questioned and surveyed in our campaigns, that say, do you know who to speak to? They say no. It's one of the reasons why they don't ask for help, because they don't know who to ask for help, right? And again, another thing with millennials that we've discovered in these conversations that we're starting with them is that sometimes they know that they can go to a parent, or they know that they can go to a counselor because they know that every school has them, but they don't want to, right? Because they don't want to be told again by an authority figure that this is wrong. And the reality of parents, what do they say? Suck it up. I went through that. I had it twice. I walked barefoot up a hill in the snow carrying 10 pounds of books. You know what I mean? We all heard those stories. And unfortunately, my parents said that to me, and I can't tell you how many times I said it to my son. How many buses I had to take, and nobody drove me to school every morning and made my lunch every morning. Right? That's what they hear. So they don't want to hear that, because that's all we do. They want to hear from their friends. And so that's why we don't just say, here, we're going to try and connect you to who's there, because that's part of it. If they so choose to do so, that's great. The reality is, they're in larger numbers. They're not going to choose to ask for help from an authority figure or somebody who can provide that counseling if students don't make it okay for them to go out and reach for that help. And in our own case, we've proven this, because where we've implemented our programs, where they're offering us statistics back, because not every school shares this type of statistic, but where information has been given to us, we've seen an average 18% increase in the number of kids asking for help after our program goes in. And when questioned, well, thank you. But it's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with the kids, because they've made it okay. They've made it okay for them to say, I need help. And the reason we know that is because the counselors ask, well, why? You're in grade 12. You say you've been suffering for 4 years. Why are you now coming to me? Because I now feel that it's okay, because my friends are talking about it. I don't feel weird coming to this office and having anybody see me coming into this office. So it really does need to start from the students. They need the education. They need the encouragement. And it's like a pinprick on a balloon that just blows. When we go, I can't tell you, when we do our unveilings, I got kids crying in the audience. And they come up to me afterwards and they give me hugs and they say, thank you for speaking about this, because Well, actually, you and I, you saw that. We in
Yeah.
University of Victoria, there was a couple of kids that came to us and said, "Thank you for speaking up, because I've always been silent about my suffering, but I now feel it's okay to go and talk to somebody." Right? It's just this flood that opens up. They need to be told that it's okay, and it's sometimes not any more difficult than that.
And I certainly, coming from the military, where it's always been suck it up, soldier. But we're starting to see that more and more now on both the active and retired member side of things, where it is okay to come forward and say, you know what, I need help. Because it's a really important piece. So, but again, you're talking about social media and the connectivity. What role do you feel social media is playing in student mental health today, and where do you think that's going to go in the future?
I wish I had a clinical scientific answer to this. There is an effect. We know there's an effect. The studies that are being produced right now are still in the early stages, but there's both some scientific and anecdotal evidence that connects mental health problems with increased use of social media. And sometimes it's as simple as this constantly being connected, this fear of missing out, is one of the studies that I just read recently, is that they're so tied into what other people are doing that there's always this fear of missing out. So they always feel that their life is missing something if they're not connected. And then there's this expectation that's placed upon them, right? We all put our best selves out there. When we put a picture of ourselves partying at the cottage, when, that one time a year that we got invited to somebody's cottage and we got all these pictures, and, I kill myself, 15 hours a day all year, and I take one trip to Paris, and I got all these pictures of Paris for a month on my screen. So what students are telling us is that they feel their life is boring in comparison to everybody else. And this is a consistent message. So science aside, what I'm hearing students say is that through social media, they're realizing that they're not worthy, whether it's because they don't look good enough, because the photoshopped images that fake influencers are putting out on screen, that they're not getting the likes. I know kids, I talked to my daughter's kids as just another example. Their big fear is posting a photo that won't get more than 100 likes. You know what I mean? And they know certain times of the day to post. My daughter and if she's listening to this, she's going to kill me. But I know her and a friend were in the back of the car one day. I was driving them someplace, and she was about to post something, and her friend slapped her phone. Goes, no, it's not the right time to post. And I had to ask the question, right? Because I was obviously, now more than ever, I eavesdrop on everything. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, and her friend said, oh no, you can't post that until 8 o'clock. And I said, why is that? Because at 8 o'clock you're more likely to get a lot of likes on your Instagram photos than you are at 6 o'clock. So it's this acceptance of their peers that they need. So social media is definitely contributing, not in the way that we used to think, like, oh, it's going to kill conversation and our kids don't have the ability to connect to each other. They're evolving. I don't believe that anymore. And I used to say that. They're evolving to a different form of communication. I don't think social media kills the ability to make connections, because we're getting more connections. They might be more and sometimes a little bit shallower. But I know some of my good friends, you included, I met from social media, and that's translated to offline relationships. So I don't buy that. But what I do buy is that the amount of time that kids are spending on social media as this new platform, that there's a fake world out there that they believe they need to be part of. And if their life, because their life is real, with the real struggles that we all face, and those real struggles are not shared openly and publicly by the people they're following, that they think it's only them. And that just makes them more isolated. And that's why I believe social media has an isolating effect on people. Not because the communication channel is different, but because we all typically post our best selves out there and not the crap that happens. We post the picture of ourselves drinking and partying the night before, never that picture of ourselves the next morning hungover or puking into the toilet. Like, whoever posts that picture. So people just don't understand that it's not reality. It's this facade that's there. And I think that'll change, but right now I think that they're getting sucked into that fake reality.
It's interesting that you say that because in our world of business and marketing, one of the things that we constantly press out to the corporate world and businesses is authenticity, the real you, the real business, and being that genuine person online. I know that in the programs that I teach at the various schools, I'm saying to them constantly, understand that your online world and your offline world are interconnected now. So that person that you present yourself to be online had best be the person you present yourself offline as well. And I see that as way. I mean, I've been down that road. No, it isn't.
It just isn't possible. And I think I agree with you. And because I was one of those people who said authenticity, I was with you, going back to our marketing, professional life. The one thing I've also learned, and I'll put myself out there, is, many times I want to say something overly political on social media right now, because that's what I'm actually thinking. And I don't, because I know that I got clients who follow me. So I said, ooh, that might upset somebody. So I'm not saying so, and I do sometimes, and I delete them right after. It's like, oh, I better not put that out there. Right. So you can never put your real self out there. And I think that's a problem. And so perception is reality. It's got nothing to do with authenticity. It's this perception that we create. Brands create it for themselves. We create it for ourselves as an individual, because, we know that if we don't position ourselves well, a university may not take our acceptance or our application because of what they've seen online. And so people, unfortunately, are fabricating, because we are what we put out there on social media, because that's the perception of others, future employers, future schools, future dates, potentially, future partners. I know that's one of the things that I hear the kids talking about, because before they date anybody, they research them on social media. So, what are they really
exactly
like?
What we tell them today as well when it comes to their employers is
that's right. So be careful what you put out there. So what does everybody do? I know, like, kids right now have multiple social media accounts. They've got their official account, and then they got their fake account that has a different name on it where they really are themselves. But even then, right? I've been taking a look at some of my daughter's friends and some of their fake accounts, and I know who they are as kids because they're here in the house. I hear them talking, and that's not what they're like on their fake accounts either.
Right.
So you're right in that it's supposed to be about authenticity, but it's not. And I don't believe that the majority of people will ever get to a point where social media is their true self, right? Because nobody wants to put their true self and the warts out there. There's a couple of us that do, right? But even myself, everybody keeps telling me how wonderful it is that I've been able to sort of keep strong and deal with my grief and do this. You guys don't see what it's like when there's nobody in the house and I'm here completely by myself, or when I take a trip alone and I'll sit there for hours crying and because it all just hits me. I don't post that stuff online because nobody wants to hear it. Nobody does. And I could see it in their eyes when they say, "How are you?" And I always say, "I'm good. Everything's great." The one time I say, "Well," they go white because they don't want to hear it, and I understand that. And so I don't put it out there. So in the same vein, none of us want to put our warts out there. And that's just leading to this perception as reality that's further isolating people.
That's, you're so very true. And there are a number of times that I am just not in a place to do this. I don't talk about it. I do it. Yeah. Regardless, whether or not, I said today said to you that, I spent 7.5 hours with a Veterans Affairs psychologist to learn a little bit more about me. There's a lot I didn't know. Do I share that online? Well, I have now. But there's some deep-rooted stuff that you can't seem to bring yourself to talk about, but maybe we should be.
Well, and we definitely should be. And I think that's the thing. And I know that even within, our circle of friends and mine, I've been seeing people come out, whether it's, they open up about their alcoholism and that their struggle, but, they've been suffering from like years and years and years with this problem, and they only now come out about it. I know I talked openly about my son, taking his life after losing his battle with depression. And I had family members calling me like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, get that off Facebook. That's a shame on the family. there's a stigma around that. Don't talk about that kind of stuff. I go, absolutely not. And as it turns out, I had a number of people who called me and said, Sam, you inspired me to talk to my son. And as it turns out, he was suffering. Or you inspired me to talk to my daughters, and they were suffering. So, we need to put the happy out there. We can't just show nothing but our warts, but we have to be honest. And maybe authenticity was the wrong word. Maybe honesty is the right word. When you're doing well and you've got happy stuff, share it, because your friends want to know and they want to celebrate with you. But you know what? If you have a bad day and you're suffering and you feel weak, talk about that too, because that does two things. Number one, it allows you to accept help, right? Talking about it, you said that you suffered from, or are suffering sometimes with depression. Talking about it, you might feel, already is a release of some of that stress and anxiety, right? Especially for people who suffer with anxiety. Just talking about it makes you feel better. So by opening up to people, not only are you helping yourself, you're making it okay for them to talk about as well, and to talk about themselves. And I think that's a good chain reaction that we need to encourage more of within schools, because kids don't have the life skills to know that. As an adult, you might have that experience and that wisdom, but you don't have that as a 15-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 21-year-old. When you're dealing with your hormones, and you're dealing with the pressures of school and getting into university and getting a job, and your parents are always harping on you. You've got all of these pressures on you. You don't have the ability to stand outside of yourself. So we need to encourage kids to talk to each other and to make it okay by speaking honestly about their experiences, and those who are hearing it to accept that without judgment and without ridicule. And that will help all of them.
I'm wondering, especially because when we're dealing with kids, how much of a benefit there would be to seeing people that they look up to speaking a little bit more about their own mental health issues. What would have been different had some of these rock stars that had recently committed suicide because of depression and mental health, what would have been if they had come out and said, you know what, I'm suffering? What would the world have been like if Robin Williams had come out and really started to talk about his mental health issues before he took his own life? I think being the adults and parents and influencers of our children, if we were out there a little bit more talking about our own mental health issues, maybe that would be easier for the kids to kind of follow suit. So that actually leads me into my next question: as what can a parent do to be more involved and be more aware of their children's mental health as they start to move into the senior high school and university years?
Well, I can share with you the perspective of the students. What would the students want? I'm not a psychologist, so I can't give that kind of advice, but I can tell you what kids are telling me. They want to be loved regardless of how well they do in school. I am shocked at the number of kids who have tied their belief that they are loved or not loved based on how well they do or don't do in school. And this is like this mounting pressure of parents, on kids to do well and to get that degree and to get a high paying job. And, that's what's going to make you happy. Being a frontline worker on an assembly line is not going to make you happy. Anything less than $80,000 a year is not going to make you happy. So we as parents need to, number one, make sure that our kids follow their passion, not our passion. I wanted to be an engineer, but I didn't have the money, or I didn't have the smarts. But you have the smarts, and you have the money now because I've worked hard, and you're not going to suffer the way that I suffered. I'm going to prevent you. So, as parents, we need to let them know that it's okay to follow your passion. And if your passion doesn't align with mine, that's okay. I still love you, and I'm still going to, support you. I'll still be here for you. If you don't do well, it's okay. I still love you. It doesn't change how I feel about you. Yeah, I'm going to cuff you in the back of the head because you didn't do well and you were out drinking 3 nights, and now you're back to me for more tuition for another year. But I still love you. Like that doesn't define my relationship with you.
Right.
So that's a big thing. So expectations of the expectations we place on them, they take that upon themselves, and that defines the way they see their relationships with us. So we have to break that cycle. We have to break helicopter parenting or lawnmower parenting. We have to break that cycle. We do. I don't like this whole snowflake notion that a lot of ultra conservatives are putting out there and saying that just kids are too fragile today. Kids go through more stress today than we ever did. As bad as it was for us, kids today, because of technology, because of increased competition, and the cost of everything, they are at a point where it is more difficult for them. You can't deny that. I mean, again, $2,000 a year to go to university. My son was $20,000 plus a year. Salaries haven't gone up that much. You know what I mean? I got into a university with a 76 average and 78 point something average in my final year. And I got into one of the most difficult and exclusive colleges to get into at the University of Toronto. Whereas kids today with a 96, 97 are being rejected in some programs. So it is a completely different world for them. So we need to understand that, and we need to allow them to make mistakes, allow them to fall, allow them to figure it out on their own, and then just be there to support them. Don't be there to take care of the problem before it happens. Be there to support them when they fall. They learn how to fall, right? They learn that the way that we did, and I think that will do them well. And two other things. Number one, the first of the two is that don't let the finances affect them. What I'm hearing from a lot of students is that while parents sometimes can't afford to pay or find a way to make it, to raise the funds to send them to university, kids are taking on the guilt of what that's doing to you. Because we sometimes say, look, you know how much I'm sacrificing to let you do this? You better get an A. You know what I mean? You better not be partying all the time. Right? And that's the wrong thing. They've got to enjoy themselves. Part of the university college experience is to have fun, is to explore, is to make mistakes, is to get that drunk one night and realize, oh crap, I got a class the next day, and you fail a test, because that's a lesson learned. But they take that pressure on themselves and they feel guilt and they feel remorse. I'm hearing that from more and more kids. So you got to avoid that. And the last thing, talk about mental health. Probably maybe the most important of all of it, because they're all going to suffer from that, right? We know that there was a study done last year in Ontario that surveyed all college students in the province of Ontario. And what they discovered is that over 68% of them said that they felt debilitating anxiety or depression at least once in their academic career, to the point that they couldn't go to school because they were just so overwhelmed with everything. So they're all feeling it, but they're not talking about it. More than 50% aren't saying anything. So we as parents need to make them know that, listen, this is what mental illness is. These are the degrees of mental illness, from like low-level anxiety to bipolar disorder, and that this is an illness, the way that liver disease and diabetes is an illness. It's an illness of your brain. The brain is an organ, just like your heart is an organ. You know, the fact that it's that much more complicated and difficult to diagnose and treat doesn't make it any less of an illness. So they need to equate those things, and they need to make it okay for students to say, Dad, Mom, you know what, I just can't go to school today. I'm shaking. As opposed to trying to get out and then not going to school and going out and getting high, because that's how they're coping with it. They need to be able to talk about it. So we as parents have to make it acceptable for our kids to open up and talk about it by us talking about our own experiences to them.
So because you've spent so much time with these students from really all across the country, from all walks of life, what are some of the indicators that you've noticed that people can look for when a kid's in crisis, when a kid's really starting to face it up against the wall?
Some of the things that you should be looking for are loss of a passion. You know, they played football, or like in my son's case, he was a karate fiend. He loved going to karate. It was one of the things he really enjoyed. And all of a sudden he just said, yeah, I'm done. Just like out of the blue. Yeah, I've lost my interest. But for 5-6 years, he really enjoyed going there, really enjoyed the environment. So, you know, or they play the guitar all the time, and then all of a sudden they don't sing anymore and they never pick up that guitar. So if they've lost their passion for something inexplicably, and especially if they're losing all passion, Like they just don't have a desire to do anything anymore, let alone just that one thing that they were truly passionate about. That may not be anything, but it could be. That's where, really start to pay closer attention. Not being lethargic, overly lethargic, right? All kids, teenagers especially, they all want to sleep in, right? Getting kids out of bed in the morning is a universal problem. But when you notice that they stay in bed longer than usual, that it's 1 PM and they still don't want to get out of bed, and that's going a couple of days in a row. That's it. When they don't hang out with their friends anymore, if they're part of a group of friends, that they're always out, and then for like a week or two, they're all of a sudden not seeing anybody and just playing video games by themselves. That could be a sign, disassociating themselves from the people and things that they love and that they were frequently doing. Those are some of the biggest signs that I'm hearing from students that have suffered when, they tell their stories to me. So those are the two big ones. But basically trying to become introvert, the more introverted they become, not that introversion is a problem. If you are, some people are just like that naturally. Mm-hmm. You can tell if all of a sudden it's become worse than it's ever been before, instead of being, at a certain level. That's what you should be looking for, at least in my experience. I'm sure there's other things that other people will have seen and experienced, but those are two for me.
Yeah, and that's certainly right on the money. I know that I've said numerous times that when you see your child who's always on their smart device suddenly off their smart device, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And it's usually around bullying of some kind. Yep. But at the same time, if they are really, really passionate about social media and being in that environment, and they're suddenly not passionate about social media and being in that environment, then there's something wrong. And it's something that parents should be aware of. We have been doing this for 45 minutes.
Wow.
And
already?
Yeah, we could probably go on for hours and hours. I can say beyond the shadow of a doubt that on a day where the solar eclipse has come by our nation for the first time in 40 years, this was a place that I would have much rather have been talking about this subject, and especially with you. Sam Fiorella, thank you very much for joining us today on the Digital Hallway, and I think everything that you have said here has been of great value. Where are you going to be with the Yellow is for Hello bench in the near future?
Well, you can always find out on thefriendshipbench.org or yellowisforhello.org. But our next installation is King's University College in London, Ontario on September 11th. That'll be our next install. Great news, and an auspicious day, no less. Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for joining us today on the broadcast. I'm looking forward to having this up on the Digital Hallway Facebook page, and we'll be ripping out the audio for the DH podcast in the near future. Perfect. Sam, thank you again for joining us, and thank you, the audience of the Digital Hallway, for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future.
To learn more about the Lukas Fiorella Friendship Bench and the Yellow is for Hello campaign, or to arrange for a friendship bench to be added to your school, visit thefriendshipbench.org.